My name is Ida. The grand opening of my architectural masterpiece, the Atrium by Ida, was in full swing. The place was alive with the soft hum of jazz, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the laughter of guests. I was in my element, shaking hands, smiling, and feeling the flash of cameras. Lydia, my business partner, glided through the crowd in a stunning red dress, clipboard in one hand and a glass of champagne in the other. She leaned in and whispered, "You did it." Just as I was about to reply, I heard a voice that cut through the music like a knife. It was Ethan, my younger brother. I froze, a glass of champagne in my hand. I turned towards the entrance, and there they were. Ethan, with his cocky grin and his suit half unbuttoned, oozing self-confidence. Behind him was my mother, Mrs. Thompson, clutching her designer purse as if she owned the world. And my father, Mr. Thompson, a step behind, his eyes avoiding mine. For a split second, I thought I was hallucinating. But then Ethan's laugh boomed across the marble floor, and I felt a knot form in my chest. "Guess word gets around," Lydia murmured beside me. I knew they weren't on the guest list. I'd personally approved every name. At the front desk, the hostess smiled politely. "I'm sorry, sir. There's no reservation under Thompson." Ethan frowned. "Check again. It's our name on the building, isn't it?" My mother stepped forward, her voice dripping with arrogance. "We were told this was a private family event. I'm Mrs. Thompson." The hostess hesitated and looked at me. I set my glass down and walked across the floor. With each click of my heels, the chatter around us dimmed. "Good evening," I said softly. My mother turned, and for a moment, confusion crossed her face, as if she didn't recognize me in my own domain. Then came the disapproving look, the same old judgment. "Ida," she said. Ethan smirked. "So this is your little project, cute. Thought you'd be designing something more ordinary." I met his eyes. It used to be small, but then I stopped listening to small-minded people. His fake smile faltered. "We'll take a table. We're family, after all." I nodded to the hostess. "Take them to the public lounge downstairs. Walk-ins only." Ethan was taken aback, and my mother's voice sharpened. "We're your family, Ida." I held her gaze steadily. "You told me not to come back." "I just kept my promise." The silence that followed was thick. Even the pianist paused mid-note. Ethan's jaw tightened. "You think this makes you better than us?" I stepped closer until my reflection filled his eyes. "No. It just means I finally stopped needing you." Then I turned to the hostess. "If they stay, make sure they pay for their drinks." Their faces froze, showing the shock, disbelief, and humiliation that I'd once felt. I walked away before they could say another word. As the music faded and the crowd thinned, I slipped away to the upper terrace. I held my heels in one hand and a glass of champagne in the other. Below me, the city was a sea of lights, like a galaxy of stars. Through the glass roof, I could still see them sitting stiffly at the bar, pretending to belong in a place they'd once said I'd never build. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Lydia. "You okay?" "They're still downstairs." I typed back, "Let them be. They'll figure it out." Leaning on the railing, I traced my finger along the cold glass. In the reflection, I saw myself, the city, and the building that had risen from the ruins of my past. A year ago, I was standing outside my parents' house, my hand hovering over the doorbell, too afraid to knock. Now, they were standing outside my creation, waiting to be let in. How the tables had turned. I remembered the day when I first discovered my passion for architecture. I was a quiet 16-year-old. While other kids were into sports or fashion, I was drawing buildings in my notebooks. I loved how buildings had a structure, a purpose. You could design where everything belonged. But my parents never saw it as a real talent. To them, it was just a passing phase. Ethan, on the other hand, was the golden child. He was charming, funny, and could get away with anything. He was always the center of attention at family gatherings. One morning, I showed my parents a sketch of a modern-style house I'd designed. I was so excited, thinking they'd be proud. My father barely looked up from his newspaper and mumbled, "That's nice, dear, but focus on something more practical." My mother gave me a pitying smile. "Honey, architecture is a tough field. You might want to consider something else." Ethan leaned over and laughed. "It looks like a toy house." They all laughed, but I didn't. Later that day, I found my sketch crumpled in the trash. That was when I learned to keep my dreams to myself. I applied to architecture school in secret and got in on a full scholarship. When I told my mother, she sighed. "Architecture? That's a man's world. You're too delicate for that." But I was determined. I worked 3 jobs, lived in a tiny apartment with second-hand furniture, and survived on black coffee and cheap sandwiches. When I graduated, I thought they'd finally see my worth. But Ethan had a business meeting, and my father suddenly had back problems and couldn't travel. I sent them photos of my first office, a small studio with white walls and a single folding table. My mother texted back, "It's small, but it'll do." That was when I stopped seeking their approval. But their words still haunted me. Ethan would call during family dinners and put me on speaker, bragging about his real estate deals. My mother would laugh and say, "You and your brother both in buildings." How ironic. It wasn't ironic, it was painful. One Thanksgiving, things came to a head. We were sitting around the dining table, the smell of roasted turkey filling the air. Ethan was talking about his new project, a high-end nightclub in the city center. Everyone was hanging on to his every word. My mother looked at him like he was a genius, and my father nodded in approval. I stayed quiet, just like I always did. Then Ethan looked at me. "You're the architecture expert, right, sis? What do you think of my spot downtown, near the new shopping mall?" I looked up and met his smirk. "It's risky. High rent and not much foot traffic after 10 p.m. You'd need a unique selling point to make it work." The air in the room changed. Forks stopped mid-air. My mother's voice cut in, sharp and cold. "Ida, please. Your brother has worked hard on this. You always have to be negative." I tried to explain, but Ethan interrupted with a laugh. "She doesn't get it, Mom. Not everyone can think big like me." Laughter filled the room. It was like a knife in my heart. My mother lifted her hand. "If you can't be supportive, just be quiet and enjoy your meal." The conversation moved on without me, and I felt like a ghost at the table. When I finally pushed back my chair, the sound was like a gunshot in the silence. Everyone looked up. I said, "Maybe you're right. Maybe I don't belong here." Ethan smirked. "About time you realized that." My mother said calmly, "If you can't act like family, don't come back." I grabbed my coat and walked out. As I passed the glass door, I saw them still laughing, as if I'd never been there. When I reached my car, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother, "Don't come back until you learn to respect your brother." I sat in my car, the screen of my phone glowing in the darkness. I was filled with a mix of anger and sadness. But then, a spark of determination ignited inside me. I whispered to myself, "I'll build something you'll never forget." A few weeks later, an email landed in my inbox. It was a property listing for a mid-town corner lot. The address was the same block that Ethan had bragged about. It was for sale, and I could afford it. I showed the listing to Lydia. Her eyes widened, and a slow smile spread across her face. "You're thinking about buying it, aren't you?" I didn't need to answer. That night, I drove to the lot. The city was quiet, and the rain was drizzling. The old building on the lot was weathered but had a certain charm. I could see the potential. I could see the glass, the light, and the open atrium filled with greenery. I signed the offer within a week, and by the end of the month, it was mine. Construction was tough. There were early mornings, long days, and endless challenges. But with Lydia by my side, we pushed through. A year later, the atrium by Ida stood tall, a symbol of my hard work and resilience. It was a place that didn't need anyone's approval to exist. As I stood on the terrace, looking at the city below, I thought about calling my mother, saying something kind. But then I remembered her words, "Some places aren't meant for you." Maybe she was right. Their house wasn't meant for me, but this building, this was my home. Behind me, the door slid open. Lydia stepped out, her hair a bit messy from the night. "They're leaving," she said softly. I nodded. "Good." She handed me another glass of champagne. "So, what now?" I looked down at the glowing sign above the entrance. "Now, I build things that don't need anyone's permission to stand." Lydia clinked her glass against mine. "To that." We stood there for a moment, two silhouettes against the skyline. Then I turned towards the elevator, ready to go home. My phone buzzed again. It was a message from an unknown number. "Your place is beautiful." I knew it was my mother. I smiled, set the phone face down on the railing, and left it there. Because some stories don't need replies.